So today I wanted to talk about what happens when we change our perspective. What happens when we flip everything upside down? When we decide to try to take the opposite approach to things? When we entertain the notion that things could be different? When I first got to college, I was terrified that my authenticity would somehow be ruined. I was, up to that point, self taught pretty much and successful at it. I mean, I had gigs, I was a working musician. The only reason I was going to college at all was to stay on my parents' health insurance plan. This was pre Obamacare, and they convinced me that it was worth it for the security of health insurance. And, maybe I might learn something along the way. Maybe. So I ended up in New Jersey, a long way from home, just outside of New York City. And in my infinite wisdom at 19, I realized this academia stuff was for the birds. I was all about free expression and what you see is what you get. Still, I went along with the program. I attended class, and I had a lot of respect for the teachers there. But I think I also had this feeling like I didn't really need to be there. Man, these cicadas are just going nuts here. Call it ego or naivete, but despite my misgivings, in retrospect, I think I got a lot out of college. Sometimes I wish I just waited to go to college until now. I mean, I think a lot of us probably would be better students when we're older. When we're young, we're so fed up with being thought of as young, as inexperienced, moldable vessels. But we're people. We have needs and desires and emotions, and we have our own ideas. It's so easy to look back on my 19-year-old self and say how naive I was. But sometimes I wonder what my 19-year-old self would say about how I turned out. Hopefully he'd be okay with it, but there's no way to really know. When we think about what it means to be authentic, are we thinking about an idea held over from our past self? Or are we envisioning some idealized version of ourselves in the future that we're striving for? Or is our idea of authenticity fluid? Meaning, do we accept that the way that we saw authenticity in the past is going to be different than it is now, and the way that we will see it in the future will obviously change? However, if we think about our authenticity as unchanging, that can become a cage and hold us back from trying new things. So, authenticity is this idea of being true to ourselves and making sure that our behavior and our outward facing persona reflects that. And as artists and creators, making sure that we're putting out work that also reflects that. We can also think of it as creating from our own perspective. In a previous episode, I talked about the work of neuroscientist Eric Kandel, who said that two different people looking at the same work of art would create two separate images in their minds depending on what stood out to them. And this is really about perspective, and that's influenced by everything in our upbringing, our state of mind, our mood. Are we hungry? Are we sad? Did we just go through a breakup? Did we just get a promotion? Anything and everything influences how we perceive, and our perspective is how we see the world around us. So what happens when we change our perspective? Is that not inauthentic? It reminds me of this drawing exercise that apparently is supposed to be a good way to improve your technique, where you take the subject and you flip it upside down. You draw the picture upside down. If we draw something upside down, we're actually much more accurate with it. And this has to do with how our left and right hemispheres in our brain process the image. Our left brain stops trying to make sense of the image, and instead we see the lines and shapes more impartially. We can set aside our feelings about the subject and instead look more coldly at the spatial relationship of the lines and strokes that we need to make. I think I heard a fish jump. Even so, is a more inaccurate picture perhaps more emotionally accurate? Does it convey our feelings about the subject more accurately? These questions haunt me. As a musician, I want to be as technically proficient as possible, but not at the expense of authenticity. I like rough edges, imperfections, the human element, and ambiguity. I feel like most of my journey has been trying to balance between these two factors, the technical and the authentic. But they aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Having better technique doesn't mean we give up our perspective. So when we try to see or hear from another perspective, does that lessen our authenticity somehow? I don't think so. I mean, if I take a lesson from a classical percussionist, it's not going to make my jazz playing sound stiff. There might be something that I take away from the lesson that affects how I play, but then I'm absorbing that into my own perspective. When an actor takes on a role, they have to see the world from a different perspective. This doesn't make them less authentic. They have to tap into their own authenticity in order to feel things as the character. But they also have to define boundaries of who the character is. I heard an interview with Bradley Cooper when he was promoting Maestro, his Leonard Bernstein movie. There's this scene when Bernstein's daughter confronts him about rumors she heard of him being gay. And there's this long pause, which in reality and in the script, Bernstein denies it. But Bradley Cooper, the actor, had this overwhelming desire to tell her the truth. And that tension in that moment is so palpable in the scene, it actually makes him more believable in the role. Flipping the drawing upside down is choosing to look at things from a different perspective. That doesn't mean that we give up our own way of thinking and everything that brought us to that point. It's a tool, a device, just like a photographer climbing up on a ladder or getting low to the ground. So, no, trying on different perspectives isn't going to squash our authenticity. If anything, it enriches our view of the world and our work. I would love to hear your own perspectives on this in the comments. That's all I've got for today. Thanks so much for hanging out. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep the flow.